Before you can do things for people, you must be the kind of man who can get things done.
Ayn Rand's novels celebrate individualism.
Do you wish to defy our common standards?
I set my own standards.
And achievement.
That train will run if I have to drive the damn thing myself.
Yet many people hate Ayn Rand.
Ayn Rand became famous for her philosophy of objectivism, which is a nice way of saying being a selfish asshole. Ayn Rand. How is she still a thing?
She's still a thing because her books are insightful and popular. Millions of copies have been sold. Rand laid out a philosophy about why capitalism is moral. She had a lot to say about romance, war, immigration, and more. I talk about those things in Ayn Rand Hatred with Yaron Brook, chair of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm told Ayn Rand is this horrible person who advocates selfishness. Why run the Ayn Rand Institute?
Ayn Rand was a radical, brilliant new thinker. And like many new thinkers who come up with new ideas, she is being vilified by our culture. Our culture
but she does
hates
promote
ideas.
Selfishness.
She does. And she defines selfishness as your rational, long-term self-interest.
The value of selfishness is that you esteem yourself as a value, that you live according to your nature, and you regard yourself as a value worth preserving.
What is truly good for you, John? How should you live the best life possible to you? And that is not our common view of selfishness, of, lying, cheating, stealing, backstabbing. That is the negation of your own self-interest. Your own self-interest involves being rational, being productive, working hard, creating, building, and trading with others.
Which is what companies do. People today also vilify greedy corporations. Elizabeth Warren.
No, they roll over their own employees. They roll over their customers, sure. Because there's nobody to balance out.
Nobody to balance out.
This is the biggest problem we have in our culture, is this perception that when you trade or when you pursue your own self-interest or when you produce and create, you are somehow a villain, you're somehow bad. Because we have our standard morality. The standard view of morality is that to be good, to be just, to be moral, you should sacrifice. You should give up what's good for you. You shouldn't trade in win-win relationships. You should sacrifice in win-lose relationship where you are the loser. That's what Mother Teresa did. That's what morality dictates. And therefore corporations and marketplaces and producers and builders and creators, by pursuing their own self-interest, their love of their profession, the money involved, they must be evil, because how can they stand up to a Mother Teresa?
I agree with you that the corporations make money by doing good, but how can you trash charity and trash what Mother Teresa did?
Nobody trashes charity, but is charity that noble? That is, if you compare,
yes.
No, it's not. If you compare the difference businessmen make in the world, they contribute a lot more to the benefit of all of us than anything you do through charity. We became rich as a society, not because of community service and charity, or those help at the margin. We became wealthy and successful and prosperous and lived good lives because of the marketplace, because of businesses, because of producers, because we build and create stuff and trade. Win-win relationships are what actually drive progress. Again, charity can be fine, but it's marginal. And to place the heavy weight of morality on that, and by definition negate the work that is done by producers and businessmen, that is truly immoral and evil.
Most people don't realize that for the corporation to make a lot of money, they have to be really good at pleasing us, the customers.
Absolutely. The only way you can make money in business is by providing customers with a value that they are willing to pay for more than what it costs you to produce. So the only way you can make money, the only way you can become a billionaire, is by making the lives of other people better, by providing them with values for themselves that they actually value, that they actually want. There's no other way to do it. If you produce a product nobody wants, don't make money.
Unless you have a monopoly. And people say some companies like Facebook, Apple, are basically a monopoly. You have no choice. They can force you to do things.
But the reality is that there are no monopolies, particularly in a free market. Now, we don't live in a completely free market, so there are lots of constraints on competition and on new businesses coming about to compete with some of these. But even today, Apple's not a monopoly. Lots of people out there have Samsung and other phones. And if Apple actually produced a bad phone, competitors would jump on it and new competition would arise. The same with Facebook and Google. They all have potential competitors. Throughout history, people have blamed corporations for being monopolies, and yet prices continue to come down. Monopolies, we're told, can jack up prices. And quality is always improved. We're told they don't care about quality because they're monopolists. And yet every version of the iPhone's actually better. Why do they do that? Because they know that as soon as they slack off, competitors will jump in and take market share from them.
We now, I'm told, have a pro-business administration. But President Trump says
tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
It is amazing how somebody could reach that level in government and be so ignorant of just basic economics. There are very few things that economists agree about in the world, left, right, center. One of the things they agree about is that tariffs are always bad, or almost always bad. Tariffs are a tax. They're a tax on consumption. They're a tax on consumption that takes the goods that are produced in other countries and treats them differently than goods that are produced in the United States.
Yeah, because we want to support the United States.
But why? The way you support the United States is by allowing American citizens to buy the best at the cheapest price possible. That is the American way. The American way is to get the best product possible. And if American companies want to compete with that, then they better produce the best product. That's how we keep them on their toes and keep them competitive. And if they can't, why shouldn't individual Americans buy the best product they can from the best producer in the world out there?
I don't know that I agree with you that all economists say tariffs are the most horrible thing, and some make, to me, valid points where they could be useful. The Chinese steal intellectual property. Maybe the tariff will deter them.
There's no reason the tariff will deter the Chinese. Again, we as Americans pay the tariff. And if we're really concerned about intellectual property being stolen, then there are other mechanisms.
Let me just back up, because, yeah, we pay the tariff, but the Chinese are punished because they don't sell us as much stuff when we tax it.
Yes. So the Chinese will sell us less stuff because of the tariff. And if there was any indication that this was being used in order to leverage, in order to force them to stop stealing IP, then it might be a positive outcome, although there are probably better ways to do that. We could, for example, any product that they steal the IP from, we can embargo that product. We could say, we're just not buying the products that you produce based on our IP. We won't buy anything at any price. Why put a tax on Americans as a way to manipulate the Chinese? They've got to be better foreign policy levers that will affect the Chinese that don't involve taxing us.
The other argument is that it protects American jobs.
Well, it doesn't protect American jobs. Every research study that looks at tariffs actually shows how it destroys American jobs. So if you put a tariff on steel, yes, you might protect some jobs in steel. But there are lots of companies in the U.S. that use steel, automobile manufacturers, washing machine manufacturers. They now pay a higher price for the steel. So their jobs are lost. And net, tariffs always reduce the number of jobs. They don't add jobs.
Why don't people get this?
People don't get a lot of stuff in economics. Economics is not as hard as people make it out to be. And yet we are constantly inundated with bad economic policies. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that if you don't trust business, if you don't trust corporations, if you don't trust the self-interested motivation of the profit motive, then you're quite happy to start putting restrictions and limitations and regulations and new taxes. People also have in America today something that is new that I don't think existed in past generation, and that is this sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to my job. My job cannot change. It has to be the same job I've always had. We used to have a spirit of competition. There used to be a spirit of, I'll maintain this job by being the best that I can be. That is gone, and American culture is much more entitled, and therefore we want to save so-called American jobs, and that pulls at the heartstrings. And to think that, no, actually this is destroying jobs, and secondarily, you don't have a right to your job, that is difficult for people to hold.
And what you left out is, yes, it's destroying jobs, but when prices are lower, other jobs get created elsewhere in America.
Yes, if we have an opportunity to buy cheap Chinese goods, then that means we have more money left over, which then we can use in order to buy other products, other goods, other services. The United States, people talk about manufacturing jobs have gone down. Yes, we're much more efficient. So we produce the same amount of stuff with a lot fewer people, primarily because of technology. And people say, oh,
technology, not trade, is what killed some of those jobs.
I think that something around 85 to 90% of the jobs were killed by technology, by robots and mechanization. And then people say, oh, people go into service jobs. They lose their manufacturing jobs. But service jobs are great. All computer science jobs are service jobs. Programming is a service job. The fact
You're working in an air-conditioned office rather than on the factory floor. It's
absolutely
more pleasant.
We have moved jobs away from physical labor and more jobs of the mind, whereas human beings, we excel.
On the other hand, it's not just a tax that takes from us. It also allows for lowering of other taxes. We get the tariff, maybe they'll lower income taxes. That's good.
Anytime they lower income taxes, generally that is good. But there's absolutely no evidence that we can generate significant amounts of revenue from tariffs. One of the things that tariffs do, if the price of these goods go up, the amount that people purchase of those goods go down. So the actual tariff that is generated, the tax revenue, is not particularly large. And given
it can be. I'm looking at the chart of tariffs in America. America used to be funded by tariffs.
That's a really funny chart because, yes, it used to be funded by tariffs when the federal government spent 3% of GDP. When the federal government was tiny, tariffs were enough. But today, the federal government spends something around 22% of GDP, more than 7 times as much. You cannot generate that kind of revenue from tariffs. You can't even generate it, turns out, from even the income tax, because the fact is that we run massive deficits. Tariffs are not going to solve that problem. What we should be doing is shrinking the size of government.
Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
That is just an ignorant statement where Donald Trump is basically leveraging the hostility and the suspicion Americans have of foreigners. It is a cheap trick to try to get support for tariffs. If Americans realized that they were the ones that were going to pay for it, and they are the ones that are going to pay for it, then they wouldn't support it. But if they think some Chinese person or some Mexican is going to pay for it, then they're much more likely to support it. So it's nothing but demagoguery.
We praise capitalism, but I would bet most Americans hate it, or at least are suspicious of it and think it hurts as many people as it helps.
Sadly, Americans have a very negative view of capitalism, and this is true not just of Americans, though. In the whole world, people are very antagonistic towards capitalism. And this is partially a result of real ignorance, partially a result of the fact that we call a lot of what's the mixed economy that we have today, some freedom and a lot of regulations and control, we call it capitalism, which is a misnomer. They blame things like...
Why is it a misnomer?
Because it's a mixed economy. There's actually some freedom, but there are all these massive regulations and controls. Government spends 22% of GDP. That's just the federal government.
40% if you include the state.
Exactly. So it's over 40%. We're not that different than Sweden or Denmark or many of the European countries that people call socialists. We're not that different from them in terms of how big our government is and how much it's involved and how much it regulates. So we don't live under capitalism. And so they blame everything that goes wrong in our world, they blame on capitalism. Everything that goes right, they claim the government made it possible. And then surprise, surprise, the American people are suspicious. And add to that, the general suspicion people have of the profit motive and of self-interest and of people actually going out there and creating values.
And it's a reason people cheered when the kid killed the healthcare executive.
Truly horrific. Here's an insurance executive, and there are lots of flaws in the insurance system, mostly because of massive government regulation. This is one of the most regulated businesses in the world. And yet they cheered when this executive who working hard to make this company function, to provide services to people who need, who want and are willing to pay for insurance. And he was murdered in cold blood, and people applauded this. It was a really sad day, I think, in American history.
But people say we're right to be angry because he made too much. He paid himself $10 million. His company made billions. That's money not going to pay people's medical bills.
The profit margin for his insurance company is quite low. It's lower than the average for the S&P 500 or for publicly traded corporations. Insurance companies do not make a huge amount of money. And they take on the risk of funding all of our healthcare and allocating it and administrating it. And if there's anger to be had, and there should be anger towards our healthcare system. Our healthcare system is not well functioning. It should be targeted at the source of the problem, and the source of the problem is government. 50% of all the dollars spent, over 50% of all the dollars spent on healthcare spent by government, primarily Medicare and Medicaid. Everything that is done in the healthcare space is heavily regulated. Every procedure, every drug, every decision a doctor makes can be second guessed by a regulator. And then insurance companies are not free to offer us individualized policies with a variety of different options that we can choose from. They have to offer us products that the government has approved is okay for us. And of course, none of us even buy our own health insurance. We get it through our employer. I mean, the system is so convoluted and absurd that we should be angry. But the anger should be at the people who made it so cumbersome and expensive and absurd, and that is government bureaucrats.
And the people who hate capitalism hate insurance companies thinking that's capitalism. But healthcare really isn't. When we go to the doctor, most of us don't even ask, what will this cost? Is there a cheaper MRI? Can I price shop?
There really are no markets in healthcare today.
Because somebody else is paying.
Somebody else is paying, and it's not that the marketplace has chosen that insurance companies pay. I mean, when you buy auto insurance, you don't expect the insurance company to pay for the oil change. You expect the insurance company to come in if you have a real crash and you real damage and it's thousands of dollars. It's a big chunk of the worth of the car. And yet we expect our insurance policies to pay for every little thing, every time we go to the doctor, every cold that we have. And that creates massive moral hazard. It encourages us to get procedures we don't need. It encourages doctors to prescribe things that we don't need. And it's not capitalism. This is not what the market has chosen. This is all driven and dictated by government regulations, government incentives, and a policy that basically says some people in Washington or at the state level know what's good for you health-wise more than you do, more than you and your doctor do.
A lot of Americans love The Killer on TikTok.
Mama, I'm in love with a criminal.
It is truly horrific and very, very sad that America has reached a point where killing an entrepreneur, killing a businessman, is something that is celebrated. It is a real sickness, and it's going to be very, very difficult to convince people of the virtue of capitalism and the virtue of markets when this is kind of their attitude. To people who work in a system that's heavily regulated, heavily controlled, and doing the best that they can, given all those constraints, and still serving the customers and providing real value.
Something called the Monday Morning Podcast.
I love that CEOs are fucking afraid right now. You should be. By and large, you're all a bunch of selfish, greedy fucking pieces of shit, and a lot of you are mass murderers. You just don't pull the trigger. That's why it looks clean.
What would happen if all those CEOs, all those selfish, profit-seeking CEOs actually stopped doing what they were doing? If they just disappeared? Of course, that's the theme of a novel Ayn Rand wrote called Atlas Shrugged. That's what happens in the novel. And I think just as happens in the novel, I think would happen in reality. Economy would collapse. The things that all these people complaining about CEOs take for granted, their iPhones and their apps and their cameras and the groceries that they buy. There's a greedy grocery store behind the groceries that makes it possible for all those things to be available when you walk into the grocery store at a price that is for the most part acceptable, right? And if it's not, you don't have to buy it. Our whole quality of life is a consequence of the work being done by those greedy, selfish CEOs and greedy, selfish corporations. And when you reject them, when you deny them, you get the kind of poverty that exists in some parts of the world. And all these people wouldn't have Monday morning shows if that was the case.
So that's the choice? Poverty or bureaucratic healthcare systems?
No, the real choice is freedom. And
so
nobody,
how would you or
nobody's-
Ayn Rand fix healthcare?
How would Ayn Rand fix healthcare? Privatize it. We would get the government out of our healthcare. Government has nothing to add to the process of healthcare that should be between myself and my doctor and my insurance company and
What
pharma
about
companies.
poor people who can't afford it?
Poor people should be able to afford healthcare. That is, in a world in which healthcare is not run by the government that only drives up costs, people will be able to afford healthcare. And of course, that's why we have insurance. Insurance is there to cover these massive expenses that you might have if you have to go to the hospital. But today, insurance covers everything, so it's very expensive. But imagine an insurance policy that only covers those extreme circumstances, the places where you really cannot afford to go to the hospital. If it only covers catastrophic, it would also be cheap and everybody will be able to afford it. It shouldn't cost more in states that don't heavily regulated health insurance. It doesn't cost more than your cell phone bill. And almost everybody has a cell phone. Everybody pays a cell phone bill. You'd think their healthcare would be more important to them than a cell phone. So almost everybody can afford catastrophic health insurance in a market economy.
A market economy, and that's what Atlas Shrugged is about, which you mentioned, and I love the book. But people hate Ayn Rand on the John Oliver Show.
Ayn Rand became famous for her philosophy of objectivism, which is a nice way of saying being a selfish asshole.
Well, being selfish is not the same as being an asshole. Being selfish means caring about your own life. Being selfish means placing your own interest, your own life, as your primary focus. It means using your mind. It means being rational, because that is ultimately, as human beings, that is the tool by which we survive. It means thinking long term, figuring out what's really good for me, what will make my life the best life that it can be. And she is smeared constantly. Constantly.
And yet her books are popular.
Books are popular. People are inspired by them. She inspires many of our leading businessmen were inspired to succeed because of her books. And yet the philosophy itself is smeared because it goes against at least 2,000 years of philosophy, 2,000 years of religion that tells us that the purpose of life and morality is to suffer and sacrifice and live for others. And she asks this really simple question: why?
Why? Why is it good to want others to be happy, but not yourself?
Why should I live for others? Why shouldn't I live for myself? I only have one life. There's only one shot at this. Why not make it the best that it can be?
For more of my content, go to johnstossel.com. I post a new short video every Tuesday. That's at johnstossel.com. She's even criticized by people who largely agree with her. Jordan Peterson.
Her noble people are too noble, and her ignoble people are too ignoble, and it divides the world too much into the bad guys and the good guys.
Given the state of the intellectuals in our world today, to say that her ignoble people are unrealistic is bizarre. All you have to do is open up a newspaper, and you will find quotes that you would find extreme even for Ayn Rand. I mean, her villains don't even talk like this. So I think her villains have all come to life in the world in which we live. And look, the fact that he views her heroes as unrealistic says more about Jordan Peterson, I think, than it does about Ayn Rand's heroes. So she presents a vision of heroism, of nobility, of achieving happiness and success in life. And I think that is all possible for human beings by again, being rational, thinking long term, and taking their lives and their careers seriously.
Where does being selfish fit in your family?
Well, it's essential. I mean, I love my wife for self-interested reasons. My love for my wife is not based on sacrifice. It's not based on diminishing myself. She makes me a better person. She inspires me. That's what love means. Imagine going to the woman you're going to marry the night before and saying, "I'm not doing this for me. This is a massive sacrifice." She would slap you in the face, as she should.
You took pity on me?
No,
You.
Instead of going to her and saying, "I'm doing this because you make me the best human being I can be. Together, I am so much better. You make me happy. It's fun to be around you. It's great. It brings me joy. Me joy." that love is the most selfish of all emotions. And I think that is true of all our relationships, our friendships. We are friendly with people that make us feel good about the world, and we enjoy their company, and they stimulate us to think about new ideas. They're engaging, they're interesting, they're fascinating. To whom? To you. So friendship is a self-interested activity. So to be self-interested means to think about self, not just in terms of dollars and cents, but to think about what it means to be a happy, successful, flourishing human being in both the material and the spiritual sense, and the sense that is not translatable into dollars and cents.
People say her books are appealing to young people, but they grow out of it once they experience life.
I think it's true that her books are appealing to young people, and appealing to young people because when we're young, we're looking for ideas and we're looking for ideals. We're looking to discover what is truth and what is right and what is wrong, and how to live our lives and discover principles for that. A lot of people, got worn down by the world around them. They lose their idealism. So many people become cynical and skeptical about everything, and they lose that desire to be heroic in their lives, to achieve great things in the world. And yes, as a consequence, they drift away from Ayn Rand's ideas, but I think they appeal to the best in us. They appeal to the noble in us. They appeal to a sense of idealism and achievement, and that life is really worth living.
What's your favorite Rand book?
My favorite is Atlas Shrugged. It was the first one I read. And it changed my life. It changed the way I approached the world. It changed my mind about pretty much everything. And so it has to be my favorite just because of that. I also think it's the most important of her books, but just personally, it was life-changing.
My life had changed already before I read the book from being a consumer reporter. But then I remember reading it and thinking, wow, how could this woman have seen all this stuff coming, the regulation, the hatred, years before it even happened in America?
Absolutely. I mean, I think once she understood the fundamental philosophical drivers of our culture, once she understood both the moral but also the deeper philosophical ideas that are prevalent in the culture, she extrapolated what would that mean as if it's not challenged, what would that mean? How would the culture become worse and worse and worse? And what she did was predict much of modern America.
And trashing selfishness goes against so much of what we revere. Here's Barney the dinosaur.
It's not so tough to share your stuff.
Yeah, sharing sounds fantastic. It sounds nice.
When she shared, she made others happy. And making others happy made her feel good too.
But the reality is that what makes the world move, what actually makes the world progress and makes our lives better, is trading rather than sharing. Trading, creating relationships of win-win. We teach our kids to share with complete strangers in the sandbox. The kid knows that mommy's not going to share her car keys with a complete stranger when they come up. We just come across as complete hypocrites. Now, if you've got a friend...
You're saying the kid shouldn't share in the sandbox?
No, the kids should be. We should teach our kids to think about, what am I getting for this?
Hold on tight?
No, not hold on tight. Find a reason to share, a reason to participate in some kind of trade. I have a backhoe, you have a truck. Let's swap, let's change, let's play together with this because there's a value in playing together. But just inculcating this idea of guilt into the kid. Oh, it's your truck, but you have to share it. Well, mommy, you don't share your car. You don't share your home. You don't share your clothes. Why should I share this little truck? Why are we trying to inculcate
just
communism
sandbox
into the kids? It's a sense of there's no private property and this is all communal. Teach the kid the value of playing with other children. Absolutely. Teach the kid the value of trading with other kids. Absolutely. But this idea that we inflict on them, this idea that it's not really yours, it's communal property, and to be a good person, you should share with everybody what is the communal property. That is maybe why we live in a world where socialism is still viewed as morally noble and beautiful, and capitalism is evil and bad.
And you and she trashed the handouts, and yet she took Social Security.
Yeah, I mean, she paid into Social Security for all those years, right? It's And why wouldn't she take it once she paid into the system? Oh, so only people who believe in socialism should be able to get their money back from the Social Security system, not the people who believe that it should be abolished, but who still end up, by use of coercion, forced to pay into it. They shouldn't get their money back? That is a perversion.
What are the worst things our government has done?
Wow. I mean, there is so much. I think our government, in my lifetime at least, the government has embraced a massive welfare state.
And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
It has basically taken over our healthcare system. I think Medicare and Medicaid, which today constitute more than 50% of healthcare. That was just the late 1960s, mid 1960s. It's not that long ago. The government has as a base massive redistribution of wealth, which I think not only hurts the people who get taxed at high rates, but I think ultimately also victimizes the people who receive welfare and are basically told, you can't take care of yourself, you're worthless, here's a check from the government, and are therefore, I think, to a large extent institutionalized into poverty. It holds them back. It doesn't encourage them to be ambitious. So certainly the welfare state, which encompasses so much.
All right, well, let's talk more about that. It happened when I was in college. Lyndon Johnson declared war on poverty.
Yep.
We shall not rest until that war is won.
It made sense. We're a rich country. Why should some people have so much while others have so little? If giving them money isn't going to do it, the government will create programs. Yes, that made sense to me.
Yes, and I think we come from a moral perspective that says it's okay to force some people to help others because they should be helping anyway. That's the moral thing to do. And this is, again, what Ayn Rand challenges. She says, no, it's not your obligation to help them.
What we would not permit is the government to initiate force against people who have hurt no one, who have not forced anyone. We would not give the government or the majority or any minority the right to take the life or the property of others. That was the original American system.
What America does beautifully is it has created a system in which people can actually advance. They can improve their own lot. They can make their lives better within the free market. And people who fall through the cracks, people who really can't make it, that's what you have charity for. That's what you have voluntary contributions from people who, for whatever reason, care, are willing to help their fellow man. That's beautiful. That's great. But that shouldn't be something that's coerced. It shouldn't be something that's forced. And it shouldn't be something that people learn to expect. It should be an aberration. It should be the exception. What people should expect is to have what they own. A system of justice where you get what you make, what you earn, and what you produce.
And this well-intended program had an unexpected side effect, which is for the first time in history, we have a generation after generation that's just helpless. They're helpless.
Once you start paying people not to work, once you start paying people not to be ambitious, then you create generation after generation of people who feel entitled, and they just expect that check to come in the mail. And they don't expect to take responsibility for their own lives and actually make something of their own life. And not only does this hurt them materially, they don't benefit materially from advancing and working and getting better. But
Which is the stuff of life often, overcoming obstacles.
Yeah, and that creates character, and that brings self-esteem. And ultimately, you cannot be happy unless you take care of yourself. You put food on the table for your family. A friend of mine used to tell the story of his grandfather, who was a bricklayer. And, he worked really, really hard, but he knew every day that the food on the table was something that he had produced, that he had brought. And that gave him a lot of pride and satisfaction. His grandson went out to be a successful CEO and incredibly wealthy because this grandfather had a sense of pride and sense of self-esteem, which I think, unfortunately, a lot of people today who are dependent on the welfare state are denied that and therefore denied their opportunity for happiness.
Here's Lyndon Johnson.
Better schools and better health and better homes and better training and better job opportunities.
And what we have today is the worst schools in America or in the inner cities, or in poor places, in the places where we have a war on poverty. We have healthcare that is nowhere near as good as it could and should be because of all these government programs that then regulate and control and institutionalize mediocrity at best. By every measure, we have gotten worse, not better, and certainly we're worse than what we could have been. All of these things, education, healthcare, and everything else needs to be produced. It needs producers and entrepreneurs to make it happen. If we liberate markets in healthcare and education and every other realm, what we get are iPhones. What we get is the amazing technology we have around us. When we control it, when we regulate it, when we limit it, when we write checks by the government and subsidize stuff, what we get is poor products, mediocre everything. I often ask my audiences, what do you think the iPhone would look like if a government committee designed it? And everybody in the audience chuckles and laughs because they all realize how absurd that would be. And yet, we're happy to have the government regulate and control and design our healthcare, design our educational system, design the things that we say are the most important things to us. We let the government do. That's the last thing we should let the government do.
Well, one of the horrible things government did was allow slavery.
Yes.
We now want to try to make amends because blacks are handicapped. They have less financial capital, often less intellectual capital because they were enslaved. So affirmative action made sense.
So slavery obviously was abhorrent and horrible, and America fought a civil war in order to abolish it. And blacks were treated even after slavery horribly by Jim Crow laws and government-led discrimination against them, which was truly
government-led discrimination.
Almost always government-led. Redlining was a government program. Laws in the South were facilitated and encouraged discrimination. In a true marketplace, discrimination can exist, but it doesn't exist for very long, and people suffer the consequence of discrimination. There's enormous profit motive in you being the one that allows everybody into your restaurant. You're going to get a much larger clientele than if you limit your restaurant participants to only some people. If you stick people at the back of your bus, they might not use your bus company. They might prefer the bus company that is much more inclusive and allows people. But when the government sanctions it and facilitates it, then it embeds it into the society and into the culture.
But if it were just the market, some people would still be racist.
Some people would be racist. You have a right to have horrible, disgusting ideas in a free society, and some people would discriminate, and they would suffer the consequence of the fact that they were racist and discriminators. The best cure for racism is ultimately freedom. It's ultimately capitalism. It's ultimately allowing people to suffer the consequences of their racism and to benefit from not being racist.
Wasn't affirmative action a reasonable attempt to make up for the racism imposed by government?
I mean, it seemed like a reasonable thing at the time. I understand why people did it, to try to make up for the negatives that happened. But anytime you violate rights, anytime you bring in coercion, anytime you start forcing people to do things that they don't believe in or that they want to do, what you create is more evil than good. So, and we're seeing that. We saw that in the massive abuses of the DEI and political correctness and woke and intersectionality and all the nuttiness that is evolved from what was conceived of as, okay, it's a reasonable project, but morphed into this complete insanity where now what we have is what's called reverse racism, but it's really just racism. But now the racism is targeted against the majority group and in favor of minority groups in scale. And what that does is, again, it creates an entitlement mentality. So the people who were generations ago discriminated against, even though today they might not be discriminated against, they're discriminated in favor of, now they expect that. Now I feel like they're entitled to it. And of course, other people then become more racist because they see that minority groups are favored. So, I'm white, so I want to protect my rights as whites. They're protecting their rights as blacks or Hispanics or whatever. It creates disintegration in society. Everybody joins a little tribe trying to fight for their particular economic well-being. And it is a disaster.
Donald Trump issued an order saying no more affirmative action in the federal government. The pendulum has swung?
There's no question. The American people have turned against DEI and woke and a lot of these programs. I think this might be one of the, if not the most important thing Donald Trump will do in his presidency. I think by stopping affirmative action at the government level and through government, all its contractors and its contractors, this will have a profound impact on the way business is done, and it will change, I think, businesses' attitudes towards hiring, and maybe we can go back to hiring people based on merit, based on character, based on ability, instead of based on irrelevant aspects like skin color and sexual orientation.
It's not totally irrelevant because we have a history of excluding people based on skin color or sexual orientation.
And the way to solve that problem and a way to redress that issue is to stop doing it, not to continue doing it in the name of a fix. So the way to get rid of racism is to stop being racist. It's to become, as Martin Luther King projected and inspired us, to become truly colorblind, which is what I think happens when you stop thinking in terms of race and in terms of all these protected groups. Anytime we introduce coercion, anytime we introduce force into human relationships, we create unintended or sometimes intended horrific consequences.
Well, talking about horrific consequences, talk about the war on drugs. Ronald Reagan.
We're going to win the war on drugs.
Yes, you always have to be suspicious when there's a war on an inanimate object, right? What does a war on drugs even mean? It really is a war on the consumption
of the people
and the production
poisoning America.
Yes. I mean, look, I think a lot of these drugs are really, really harmful and really, really bad for you. Don't use them. It's pretty simple. And people who do use them suffer the consequence of using them. But when you launch a war on drugs, what you do is you actually raise their attractiveness commercially. The profit margin goes up because these organizations who are selling the drugs, their risk is higher. So you create huge profits for cartels. Because there's so much at stake, these profits, they are willing to engage in violence. What they're doing is illegal anyway, so why not use violence in order to secure their monopoly over trade in these goods? Competition becomes not competition in the marketplace over price and quality. Competition becomes a competition between gangs in order to impose their will in a particular geographic area. The war on drug leads to dramatic increases in violence. It leads to massive corruption among the police who have to enforce a law that is irrational to begin with, instead of letting people make decisions about what to consume and what not to consume. And yes, some people are going to make bad decisions and bad things will happen to them. That is the price of making bad decisions.
Just let everybody take whatever poison they want and hurt themselves?
Let everybody take whatever poison they want and hurt themselves and rely on the fact that most people, overwhelming majority of people, are rational and won't do things that are actually self-destructive.
For more of my content, go to johnstossel.com. I post a new short video every Tuesday. That's at johnstossel.com. One area where I think we do need government is the environment, because I don't see a good capitalist reason why I'm going to reduce my pollution to help somebody in the next state. Is it not?
If we look at things like clean air and clean water, if you're doing something that clearly is harming me, if you're polluting in some way that is clearly making me sick, we have legal redress in order to deal with that. That does not require massive bureaucracies of environmentalists, of environmental regulations. What do you mean
legal redress? I'm going to sue you as an individual?
Absolutely. Sue me as an
our
individual.
Legal
Or
system
class
is so
action suits.
So slow and expensive? That would get rid of pollution?
Absolutely. And that's ultimately how we've gotten rid of a lot of the real pollutants, the real problems. But once you give it into the hands of bureaucrats and let them decide at their own discretion what is a pollutant, what isn't a pollutant, without going through a legal process, now you've given them a lot of power. You've given them a lot of power over businesses and over individual behavior. Somebody said that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it is incredibly corrupting. So again, maybe initially what they wanted was a little bit cleaner air and a little bit cleaner water, but now they want to regulate and control every activity they were engaged in. And they do often do it not in the name of human life, on bettering human life, but they do it in the name of the environment, as if there's some entity out there that is external to human beings that has a value beyond its value to human beings. So, in the name of some little snail, or in the name of some little fish, they're willing to shut down huge improvements to human life. So the standard is no longer human beings, human well-being. The standard has become some amorphous Mother Nature and what is good for her.
And we saw that go bad recently in California.
Yes, I mean, there is, California has lots of water problems. We saw part of that during the fires recently. There's a shortage of water, particularly in Southern California. Northern California has plenty of water. And in the old days, a long time ago, they used to move massive amounts of water from the north to the south, and there were these big projects that transferred water in order to make sure that the Southern California had enough water. These days, there's still a lot of water available in the north that cannot be moved south because of some, tiny little fish that lives in the delta smelt. Can't move water south because of this delta smelt. Instead, this water pours into the Pacific Ocean as California says continuously that they're in these emergency drought situations. And you see this over and over again. They can't widen fire lanes because there's some plant that they had to uproot when they were widening the fire lanes, and that plant was endangered. And you couldn't take the plant and move it somewhere else because that would take it out of its local environment or whatever.
That was Broughton's milk vetch?
There's this plant that grows at the side of this path that was created to prevent fires. They wanted to expand it, and they wanted to change the poles from wooden poles that burn to metal poles that would sustain fire. And they were shut down by the environmentalists because of this crazy plant. It couldn't be even moved somewhere else. It had to be in its original environment. And the consequence of that, of course, is the burning down of thousands of homes, the destruction of lives, the actual death of many people. It was a lot of it was preventable. But when you place the value of a plant with a funny name above the value of human life, then what that leads to ultimately is the destruction of human life.
One thing where I, and maybe even you agree, it's a job for government is defense.
Yes.
But for years, even Eisenhower, when it was much smaller, worried about the big defense complex constantly growing.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
I'm encouraged now that people are talking about endless wars. That's new.
Yes, and of course the problem is that there's this idea that the government should have defense, but what is the purpose of that? You would think it's in the name. The purpose of having a military is to defend the individual rights of Americans. It's the purpose of government, really, the only purpose of government. But we've gone far beyond that. Over the many decades, we have decided to go all over the world to fight communism for the sake of the local people, whether they wanted us there or not. We have gone out to bring democracy to the Middle East, whether the people there wanted democracy or not. Sacrificed the lives of thousands of our own troops to fighting to bring all kinds of bizarre goals to all kinds of godforsaken places around the world. If a defense establishment were really focused on protecting Americans, protecting their rights and property, and engaging in war and engaging only when it was an act of self-defense, then the government would be able to pursue its actually real legitimate goal and not have these bizarre adventures all over the world.
But the purpose was to preserve democracy, and the world's getting smaller, travel's easier. Or you could argue that standing up for democracy in Vietnam is protecting America.
But it's not protecting the immediate rights of Americans, and there's a massive cost, the cost of tens of thousands of lives of American soldiers. Americans, once you become a soldier, particularly when you have a draft like we did in Vietnam, they don't lose their rights, right? So their rights are not being protected. They're being sacrificed for some kind of vision, global vision. And then, of course, we engage in these wars and we make sure not to win them. And all these soldiers
What do you
have
mean
died.
we make sure not to win them?
We never really tried to win the war in Vietnam. We've never really tried to win any of these wars.
We mean to be humane, we didn't use nuclear weapons?
Yes, because they're not really clearly in our self-interest, because the lives of Americans are not really at stake here. We never actually went out there and said, we need to win this, whatever it takes to win. And what happens is we fight so-called humane wars. I think that's a contradiction in terms. Wars cannot be humane. You either win a war or you lose a war. And what we've become very, very good at is losing wars, most of which we should have never started. We should have never gotten into. We should have never participated in, because there was no real risk to American lives. Yes, there was a hypothetical one day, maybe, but by that logic, we could just take over the entire world and turn it capitalist. That would make it better. But that is a rotten logic, and there's a price to pay. And the price is not only money, the primary price is the lives of our soldiers.
You agree that it was worth fighting World War II?
Yes, I think it was worth fighting World War II because there was a real threat to America. And we entered World War II after we were directly attacked. We fought World War II to rid an evil. There was a direct threat to the lives of Americans.
What about Kosovo? We stopped ethnic cleansing.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
That is not the job of the American government to stop ethnic cleansing around the world. It's not the job of the American government to sacrifice American kids for the sake of the lives of people outside the United States.
What about Grenada?
A joint effort to restore order and democracy on the island of Grenada.
We didn't sacrifice American kids, but there was this communists had taken over. They were going to maybe bring in a Cuban Soviet military base. Now they vote for their leaders.
Which is wonderful. There's no question that a lot of what the United States has done around the world has made the world better. Even getting rid of Saddam Hussein is better. He was a really, really, really bad guy. No question about that. But again, there's a cost to these things, and the cost is not justified. Yes, Grenada, by chance, didn't cost lives of anybody. Iraq certainly did cost a lot of lives. And what was the ultimate purpose? Once you negate that purpose, once you're willing to do Grenadas, where the direct interest of the United States is non-existent, then there's no limit to where you're willing to go to war in order to bring about some outcome that somebody imagines is better for the world.
What about Ukraine?
Well, I think Ukraine is a situation where I wouldn't, and I don't think the United States should put troops on the ground in order to fight that war. But if we can help another country stop an aggressor, stop somebody who has ambitions for far more than Ukraine, then I think it's worth a while, and it's relatively cheap to stop him now rather than have to deal with him much later.
$17 billion is relatively cheap?
In the world of a $1 trillion defense, or close to $1 trillion defense budget, yes, it's relatively cheap. And it's relatively cheap, particularly when you take into account the costs that are going to arise if Putin ever attacked NATO. And then by treaty, we would be obligated to participate. And now we're not just talking about money, we're talking about lives. Stopping him in Ukraine has enormous value to the United States. Not enough to put troops on the ground, but enough to spend some money, particularly given how much money the United States spends already.
You were born in Israel. America gives $3 billion to Israel. Is that right?
It gives the primary support it gives to Israel is military support. It used to give economic support. I don't think it should give anything to Israel. Israel's a relatively rich country that should be able to fund its own defense and fund its own economy and not become a welfare recipient off of the American taxpayer. Israel can defend itself. Indeed, part of the problem that Israel faces right now in defending itself is because it gets so much aid from the United States. That aid can be used to tie Israel's hands and prevent it from doing what is necessary to defend itself.
Moving on to immigration. You're an immigrant. Ayn Rand supported immigration.
She was an immigrant.
A lot of people came to America. Americans didn't like this. And now there's this crackdown, and most Americans are solidly behind that.
Sadly, the attitude of Americans towards immigration has changed dramatically, really over the last 100 years. This used to be a land that had open borders, and people came in as long as they weren't carrying infectious diseases or they were criminals, they were allowed to come in. In those days, there was no welfare state, so they, of course, had to work in order to sustain themselves. Unfortunately, today, we have ever-growing hostility towards immigrants. We have very, very limited legal immigration. Legal immigration is unbelievably complicated and complex and makes it almost impossible to come here. And many people, as a consequence, who want a part of the American dream, choose to come here illegally because it is the only option available to them to come to the United States. And that has caused resentment among Americans. But it is sad because immigrants ultimately are a massive benefit to the Americans that live in America. And of course, America is always supposedly the land of the free. What is it about this arbitrary line that we draw in the sand that makes it impossible to be free to cross it?
Because people will come here and take our jobs and collect our welfare benefits. You can't have open borders with a welfare state.
We could, of course, eliminate welfare for immigrants. We could say if you come here, you don't get welfare benefits.
And the illegal immigrants mostly don't.
And illegal immigrants don't, although many of them come under the guise of asylum, and then they kind of legal, and then they tend to get a bunch of welfare and benefits that I think a lot of people resent.
They get Obamacare and hospitals.
And in New York, they put them up in hotels and in different places.
Because that's humane.
200 families with children will be placed at the Row NYC Hotel in Midtown.
There is a real basis for people resenting that fact, that people are crossing over and just getting handed goodies.
Families will be offered an array of legal and medical and social services. The children will also be enrolled in public school.
And one way to deal with that is not to restrict immigration. Immigrants are net positive. The way to deal with that is to restrict the goodies, to restrict the welfare payments that they receive. If you go back to they take our jobs, this is the same attitude towards automation. It is the same attitude towards trade. Your job is not yours. You have to earn it. And the fact that we are so afraid of competition from immigrants coming to this country is sad. And of course, when they come here and they actually come here to work, they create more jobs than they destroy. So you, as an individual, might be affected by them. You might lose their job. But you live now in a society that has more possibilities, more possible jobs, more opportunities because the immigrants, many of them are entrepreneurs, and even if they're not entrepreneurs, they're consumers, and as such, they're creating opportunities for others.
Here's Tucker Carlson.
These new rivals compete primarily with the very Americans most likely to have lost their jobs, and the effect is lower wages.
These immigrants come in and they compete for all kinds of jobs, and if we made the requirement to come into the United States having a job offer, then they would come and fill in the jobs that Americans are not actually filling. And there are plenty of those. There are lots of wanted ads that go unfilled all the time. And of course, every serious economic study has shown that the net effect that they have is to raise wages of others. They create more jobs than they supposedly take away. But again, there's a whole mentality. There's an entitlement mentality. I deserve to have this job no matter what, and I deserve to have it at the wage that I've always had it at. It's Ayn Rand called this, the divine right of stagnation. I have a right to stagnate and to force all of you to stagnate with me. Immigrants bring dynamism. We should embrace that.
Dynamism meaning change, new ideas.
New ideas, new jobs, new entrepreneurs. Half of all the very successful Silicon Valley startups were founded by immigrants. So they shake things up, and that should be something we embrace.
A lot of Americans don't want things shaken up. People say, I don't want to press 1 for English. The Homeland Security Advisor.
America is for Americans and Americans only.
We made the country good, better than other countries. Why would we bring in these other people?
It's not really we who made this country a great country. We stand on the shoulders of many generations that have worked hard to make this country what it is. Most of those generations were immigrants. Most of those generations came to this country, and they worked hard. And at the end of the day, what made America great are the ideas of the founding. None of us are the founders. And it's those ideas that not our genes, not our skin color, not where we came from in the world, but the ideas that what made this country great. And by limiting immigration, by restricting some people, saying you're not free, you don't have liberty, we are basically working against those ideas. We're negating the very principles that made us as successful as we are.
Sounds like you want America to be selfless.
No, I want America to be selfish. I want to be able to hire whomever I want. It's none of your business or the government's business or anybody's business who I hire. And if I want to go down to Mexico or to travel to Europe and hire a bunch of engineers or to hire a gardener from Mexico, why is it anybody's business who I hire and who I engage in trade with? It is, first of all, individualistic. It is my right to engage in transactions with whoever I want. And it is a violation and an abuse of my rights for the government and people in society to step in and restrict my abilities to trade with other people. The United States benefits enormously from immigrants. We've talked about this. Wages go up, new jobs are created, businesses are started, entrepreneurs build new businesses, build new products that we never had before. We all are massive beneficiaries of the fact that we have immigration, and the more robust an immigration system we have, the more all of us will benefit from it. Americans are all, one way or the other, ultimately immigrants. So yes, America is for Americans, but let's encourage more people to become Americans. Let's encourage more people to join us in this wonderful thing called America.
Some Americans say, all right, that worked when we brought in Europeans, but now we're bringing in the wrong people and culture.
We are bringing in peasant cultures, driving drunk and dumping your crap on the ground. I mean, it is changing our culture.
But this is xenophobia, and this is xenophobia that's always been attached to immigration. When the Irish came here, they were accused of being barbarians and primitive and so on.
I don't see no Americans. I see trespassers. Irish hops.
When the Italians came, they brought organized crime or whatever. Every wave of immigrants has been accused of the same thing. The fact is that within a generation or two, they assimilate quite well no matter where they come from. And there's a certain real ugly racism behind all of that. They are good people in every culture. And if we demanded and required them to work, to learn English, for example, to assimilate into our culture, then the best would come here, not the worst. A lot of the immigration debate is done in collectivistic terms. We, as if all American people have one voice or one consciousness or one interest. And immigrants, as if they're all just one mono group that comes in and does something. But this is a country of individualism. This is a country about individuals. And many of us benefit enormously from our interaction with immigrants, and who has the right to stop us from that interaction? And the immigrants themselves are individuals, some of them incredibly productive. Some of them will come to America and fail and leave. Some of them, indeed, might be even criminals, and they will go to jail. They need to be treated as individuals with rights, but we as Americans should be treated as individuals with rights and allowed to trade and interact with whomever we want, as long as we're not violating other Americans' rights. Who is to stop us?
The Research Center for Immigration Studies says lifetime fiscal drain, taxes paid minus benefits received for each illegal immigrant is about $68,000. That sounds like a drain.
I'm skeptical of a lot of the data that comes out that says that this is a drain. I wonder whether they take into account all the different impacts that new immigrants make on the economy, the jobs that they create, the fact that they are consumers.
I don't think they did. Those things are harder to measure.
Exactly. So what happens is you measure what you have available. You measure the data that's available, and things that are hard to measure don't get measured. So the real impact, the real benefit that immigrants bring to this country, it goes unmeasured. How do you actually measure what a startup or what's called a unicorn in Silicon Valley, the value that creates long term? It's almost impossible to actually value the surplus value created there.
Some immigrants are Muslim fundamentalists who bring in ideas we don't like. Some are socialists.
So yes, immigrants are going to bring ideas that we don't like and that we don't support. But if we're really confident in the ideas that we have, if we really believe in the ideas in America of the founding, the ideas of individual rights, the ideas of capitalism and liberty, then we should fight for those ideas. We should insist on having our immigrants assimilate. And part of the way they will assimilate is when they encounter Americans that are proud of the ideas that represent America. And here I think we're at a loss. America is losing. It's not losing because immigrants are coming and bringing bad ideas. It's losing because Americans are adopting bad ideas. It's Americans who teach at our universities that capitalism is awful and horrible. It's Americans who teach at our universities that the founding fathers, were terrible human beings. What we need is to, resurrect, to bring back the ideas that actually made this country great, and then teach them to the immigrants, and really stand for those ideas and represent those ideas and encourage them to assimilate, those ideas.
And those ideas that made America great are?
The ideas of liberty, the ideas of freedom, really the idea of individual rights. It's really in our Declaration of Independence. Each individual has an inalienable right to his own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. People come here because they want to pursue their happiness. What we need is to give them the intellectual framework, the idea of individual rights, the idea of liberty and capitalism as the way in which pursuit of happiness is made possible. If we stand for those ideas, they will assimilate. If we reject those ideas, we've only got ourselves to blame.
Is there any limit to the number of immigrants we can acclimate at one time?
Not really. I mean, the limit is the number of jobs that are available in the economy. So if you made immigration limited to jobs, if you come to the border with a job offer, you're in, and you're not a criminal, you're not a terrorist, and you don't have an infectious disease, you're in, then I don't know what the number is. And certainly no central planner, bureaucrat knows what that number is. The market will determine the number by the ability to absorb new employees, new entrepreneurs into our economy. But there's no cap that should be enforced, again, by some central planner who has conceived of what is the optimal number of Americans.
As I bring this to a close, you've made many good points, and we keep saying how terrible so many things are. I think we should also point out that despite all these problems, for most people, life's getting better.
There's no question. Life, from a material sense, certainly, life has never been better for most people on planet Earth. Life keeps getting better for Americans materially, but it does so all over the world. We have fewer poor people. Globally, the number of extremely poor people is shrinking dramatically. And yes, and it's important for us to recognize why. Life is getting better because there are entrepreneurs out there creating amazing products, inventing new drugs, which we then vilify them for doing, that make our lives better, creating new devices that make our life simpler to live by. Just making our lives better is what entrepreneurs do and what they've done now since the birth of capitalism 250 years ago. And we take it all for granted, sadly. But yes, life on Earth, because of that self-interested motivation to make money and to make a profit and to do the things that you love and to create real values in the world, that self-interested motivation that drives so many people out there makes the world a better place. They can only make their money by trading with us. And trade, by definition, is win-win. Every time I engage with a business, I'm better off, they're better off, the world is better off.
Thank you. Thank you.
Trade is win-win. If I didn't think I was entering a trade that my life would be better as a consequence, I wouldn't enter the trade. So once in a while, I might even buy a lemon and regret it afterwards. But I always enter the transaction with the expectation that my life will be better off at the end of the day. So when I interact with a business, my life is better off as a consequence, and the business has made money. It's win-win across the board. Our lives are better off for the little bit of capitalism we still have preserved in the world around us.
Thank you, Yaron Brook.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. New episodes drop the first Monday of every month. You can subscribe wherever you get podcasts.